It is a strange and startling thing that the world often mistakes weakness for strength and strength for weakness. A tyrant in his throne may seem invincible, yet history shows us that his power flickers and dies like a candle in the wind. Meanwhile, a frail old woman, singing hymns as the flames rise around her, outlasts the empire that sought to silence her. The courage of martyrs is not the roar of lions, but the quiet persistence of lambs who refuse to renounce their shepherd. They stand not because they are made of sterner stuff than we, but because they know the one in whom their frailty is hidden. Fire consumes straw, but it refines gold. So it is with the church. Persecution scatters the chaff and leaves only the precious metal of faith, shining all the brighter for the furnace in which it was tested. When I speak of martyrs, I do not merely recall ancient saints in Roman arenas, though their witness still burns like a torch through the corridors of time. I speak also of the countless unnamed ones, the quiet mother who bore shame for Christ's name, the student who stood alone against mockery, the missionary who labored in obscurity and fell unnoticed save by God. Their courage is of a peculiar kind, different from the battlefield, different even from the heroism of great explorers. For theirs is the courage not of conquest but of surrender, not of wielding the sword but of laying it down. They did not trust in themselves, but in the promise that he who loses his life for Christ's sake shall find it. The world, dazzled by spectacle, misses this paradox. It is inclined to ask, what good is it to die, to waste a life, to vanish into obscurity for a creed? And yet it is precisely through such seeming waste that heaven's arithmetic is revealed. For one seed must fall into the ground and die if it is to bear fruit. The martyr, in vanishing, multiplies. Their blood, as the ancient saying has it, becomes the seed of the church. What Rome sought to stamp out grew tenfold beneath her heel. What tyrants sought to extinguish glowed brighter after the smoke cleared. Such is the irony of the kingdom. Death becomes the midwife of life. Consider also what fire does to metal. Gold in its raw state is mingled with dross, its beauty concealed beneath impurity. Only in the furnace does it reveal its radiance. In like manner, faith often lies mingled with vanity, comfort, or compromise until trial comes. It is the fire that distinguishes what is genuine. When persecution strips away the outward trappings, what remains is the pure love of God shining, indestructible, imperishable. We might say that the martyrs were not men and women of extraordinary strength, but ordinary souls who trusted an extraordinary Christ. Their courage was not self-manufactured but bestowed, not rooted in pride but in a deep surrender to the eternal. And what of us who live in times of relative ease? Are we exempt from the call to such courage? By no means, for though our fires may not be of iron and flame, each of us will face furnaces fashioned for our souls, ridicule, loneliness, loss, temptation to prefer safety over truth. We too must ask, what is my gold and what is my straw? The martyr's gift is not simply in their death, but in reminding us that every Christian life is a life under the sign of the cross. To follow Christ is to follow him into suffering before glory, death before resurrection, humility before exaltation. Yet let us not picture this courage as grim stoicism. The courage of martyrs is marked by joy. Their eyes were not fixed on the fire, but on the face beyond the fire. They endured because they looked for a city with foundations, whose builder and maker is God. They could sing not because pain was absent, but because glory was near. Their joy was not stolen even by torture, for it was anchored in eternity. This is a joy the world cannot comprehend, because it does not spring from circumstance, but from communion. To walk with Christ into the furnace is better than to walk without him in the palace. And so their lives stand as luminous parables, inviting us to measure our own by a higher scale. Do we cling to passing comforts, or do we invest in treasures that fire cannot consume? Do we fear the loss of reputation more than the loss of truth? Do we believe that the smallest act of fidelity in the face of scorn carries weight in heaven? These are the questions the martyrs press upon us. They do not condemn us. Rather, they beckon us upward, reminding us that our home is not here, and our courage need not come from ourselves. In the end, the courage of martyrs reveals not their greatness, but God's. Fire reveals gold, trial reveals grace. Their testimony whispers across the centuries that weakness given to God becomes strength unshakable, and death endured for love of Him becomes the doorway to everlasting life. Now, when we reflect upon the courage of martyrs, it is not enough to stand at a distance as admirers of some long, finished tale. Their witness is not merely history, but prophecy, not merely remembrance, but invitation. Each martyr, by his death, asks us what we are living for if a truth is not worth dying for, one must wonder whether it is worth living for at all. Theirs was not a reckless pursuit of suffering, nor a grim courting of death. They cherished life as deeply as any of us, but they had come to believe that there is a life beyond this life, so radiant, so enduring, so utterly satisfying, that even death itself could not rob them of it. Here lies the central paradox, that the martyrs were free men and women precisely because nothing could enslave them, not fear, not chains, not fire. Chains. The tyrant's threats became powerless once they had set their hearts upon Christ. Imagine, if you will, a man who has already surrendered his fortune. What power has a thief over him? So too the martyr who has yielded even his life to God stands beyond the reach of those who would terrify him. It was not that they loved suffering, it was that they loved something greater than safety. We are so easily deceived by shadows, thinking this fragile life is our only treasure. But the martyr reminds us that eternity is real, that heaven is more solid than earth, that the soul is weightier than the body. It is as though their blood writes in scarlet letters across history. You were not made for comfort, but for glory. And glory, as I have often said, is not the tinsel of earthly applause, but the acknowledgement of God Himself. His delight, His welcome, His well done. To endure the fire in hope of hearing that voice is courage indeed. Yet do not suppose that martyrdom is an experience reserved for the few, while the rest of us are left to drift upon calmer waters. Every Christian, in some sense, is called to a martyrdom, if not of blood, then of will, if not of the body, then of pride. The courage of martyrs is needed in the quiet places, the student who resists the current of unbelief, the worker who refuses dishonest gain, the parent who sacrifices reputation for faithfulness. These are the hidden martyrdoms, unseen by men but precious in God's sight. The same fire that revealed gold in the amphitheaters of Rome burns quietly in the kitchens, classrooms, and marketplaces of our own time. It may be that you will never face the sword or the flame, yet you will face choices between comfort and truth, between silence and witness, between the applause of men and the approval of God. Each of these moments is a small furnace, and though the world may scarcely notice, heaven sees. For in every age, the courage of martyrs continues, not only in those who fall before emperors, but in those who live daily beneath the cross. What then shall we take away from their example? Not despair at our weakness, but hope in Christ's strength. For the martyrs were men and women like ourselves, frail, tempted, often afraid. But in surrendering to God, they discovered a courage not their own. They remind us that the fire which terrifies us may also purify us, that suffering borne for Christ becomes the seed of joy everlasting. They tell us that the life most secure is not the life preserved, but the life surrendered. And so, the courage of martyrs is not locked away in ancient history. It is the inheritance of all who belong to Christ. The question is not whether we shall be called to it, but whether, when the hour comes, whether in a public trial or a private sacrifice, we shall remember that fire reveals gold and trust ourselves to the refiner's hand. Let us look more closely at what truly animated the martyrs. for it was not mere stubbornness, nor an appetite for drama. Their courage was born of love. Love is, after all, the only power strong enough to make a man sing in the fire. A cold conviction may carry us through an argument, but only love can carry us through a furnace. The martyrs loved Christ more than they loved breath itself. And this was not because they despised life, but because they had found the life that cannot die. They clung to Him who is resurrection and eternal joy, and in that clinging, every earthly loss became bearable. We must recognize this. To the martyr, the fire was not the end, but the threshold. The lions in the arena, the executioner's blade, the jeering crowd, these were but the doorway to a banquet, the veil before the vision of God. Imagine a weary traveler who has long trudged through fog and rain. To him, the sight of his homeland shining on the horizon makes even the last mile of hardship sweet. So it was with the saints who gave their lives. The homeland they sought was heaven itself, and death was no terror once it had become the passage to their true country. I often think we misunderstand courage. We imagine it as the absence of fear, but the martyrs were not immune to trembling. They felt the sting of pain, the dread of loss, as deeply as you or I. Their greatness lay not in an inhuman hardening of the heart, but in a divine strengthening of the soul. Courage is not fearlessness, but faithfulness in spite of fear. It is the refusal to let fear dictate allegiance. And so the martyr, with knees shaking, heart pounding, still whispered, "Christ is Lord," and thereby gained a victory greater than all the armies of kings. It is a sobering truth that the world often thinks fire destroys, while in God's arithmetic fire transfigures. The tyrant heaps wood to burn away a faith he hates, yet finds that the smoke rises like incense, and the flame spreads light farther than he imagined. Persecution has always had this unintended consequence. The more the world has sought to stamp out the church, the more deeply she has taken root. For Christ himself declared that the gates of hell shall not prevail against his people. And so every martyr's grave becomes a seedbed of faith, each drop of blood watering the soil for future generations of believers. This should awaken us from the illusion that safety is the supreme good. A life preserved at the cost of truth is not a life gained, but a life squandered, whereas a life surrendered to Christ, though cut short in years, is a life crowned with eternity. The courage of martyrs unmasks our hidden idolatries, our small clinging to reputation, comfort, or ease. They ask us by their deeds, not their words, "Do you love him more than these?" Let us not imagine this courage as an unattainable height. The same Spirit who steadied Stephen's gaze as stones fell upon him is the Spirit given to us. The same Lord who sustained Polycarp in the flames walks beside us in our daily trials. The God of martyrs is not far off. He is with us now, quietly training our souls, teaching us in lesser sufferings how to bear greater ones. If we learn to be faithful in the small fires, we need not fear the great. Thus, the courage of martyrs is not a relic to be admired, but a living reality to be imitated. It is the courage to stand for truth when it costs us friends, to practice kindness when it costs us comfort, to forgive when it costs us pride, to confess Christ when it costs us peace with the world. This is the daily martyrdom to which we are all summoned, and in it lies the secret of true joy. There is a profound lesson hidden in the image of fire revealing gold. Gold, in its natural state, does not appear as the treasure it becomes. It is veined with earth, cloaked in stone, mixed with impurity. Only when it is thrust into the crucible does its brightness emerge. So it is with the soul. Left in comfort, we may remain mingled with vanity, idleness, and half-belief. It is trial that strips away illusion, suffering that exposes whether faith is real. The courage of martyrs is not merely about enduring death, but about allowing God to bring forth purity through the furnace. Their witness assures us that what the world calls loss, heaven calls gain. I believe this is why the Church has always honored the memory of martyrs with such reverence. Their stories are not intended to stir horror, but to awaken longing, the longing for a faith so steadfast, so single-hearted, that nothing can break it. We honor them not because they were flawless, but because they trusted utterly. Their names remind us that courage is not a rare talent bestowed upon a few, but a grace made available to all who yield themselves wholly to God. When we read of those who sang while flames consumed them, or prayed for their persecutors while swords struck them down, we are tempted to think them superhuman. But in truth, their strength was borrowed. It came from the one who himself endured the cross. The martyrs reflect his courage as the moon reflects the light of the sun. They shine, but their shining is derivative. And this, far from diminishing them, magnifies their glory. For the true marvel is not that men were strong, but that God so filled their weakness that it became indomitable. Even today, though we may not face colosseums or inquisitions, the spirit of martyrdom continues in hidden ways. The child who chooses honesty over acceptance, the worker who refuses corruption, the believer who forgives when the world urges revenge. All of these are small flames in which gold is being revealed. If we shrink from them, preferring ease, we may keep our outward comfort but lose our inward strength. Yet if we embrace them, however costly, we discover that joy springs up even in the heat of trial. For courage is not the extinguishing of fear, but the blossoming of hope in the midst of it. And so the courage of martyrs becomes a mirror for our own souls. It asks us not simply, would you die for Christ? But perhaps more urgently, will you live for him? For to live faithfully day by day, resisting the thousand small pressures to compromise, is itself a kind of martyrdom. The difference lies only in degree, not in essence. For whether in the fire of execution or the fire of daily obedience, the question remains the same. Is Christ worth more than all else? The answer of the martyrs is clear. They declared it with their lives and sealed it with their deaths. And their testimony still resounds, calling us beyond timidity, beyond half-heartedness, into a love that fears nothing because it has already surrendered everything. The courage of martyrs also carries within it a kind of homesickness, a longing not only to be faithful here, but to be united with Christ in his eternal kingdom. Their endurance was not fueled by grim duty alone, but by a vision of joy. They knew that the end of their earthly journey was not darkness, but dawn, not silence, but song. To the eyes of the crowd, their deaths seemed tragic and futile. Yet in heaven their entry was greeted as triumph, as if the gates themselves swung wide to receive royalty. For what greater coronation can there be than to be welcomed by the King himself? It is here that we must remember, heaven is not a vague consolation prize, nor an abstract comfort for weak souls. It is the deepest reality, the country for which we were made. The martyrs did not endure because they were blind to suffering, but because their eyes had been opened to glory. They could see, however dimly, what lay beyond: the face of God, the communion of saints, the joy unbroken and unending. Such a vision renders even the fiercest fire but a passing shadow. There is a temptation in our age to think that faith should shield us from suffering, as though God's favor were measured in comforts granted. But the martyrs reveal the opposite, that faith often leads us into the very heart of trial, not to destroy us, but to transform us. The God who allows his children to face fire also steps into the furnace with them, as he once did with the 3 in Babylon. The miracle is not always deliverance from pain, but the discovery of his presence within it. The martyrs remind us that no suffering endured for love of Christ is wasted. Every tear, every wound, every loss borne in faith is gathered into the treasury of eternity. This, then, is why their stories endure not as tales of despair, but as beacons of hope. They teach us that the ultimate question is not how long we live, but what we live for. Life measured in years may seem long, yet if lived without truth, it is but a shadow. Life cut short for the sake of Christ may seem wasted, yet it is filled with eternal weight. Fire reveals gold, eternity reveals the true value of a soul. And so, dear friends, let us not fear the furnaces of our own age. They may come in different guises, in ridicule, in isolation, in temptations to silence our witness. Yet the same grace is offered to us that was offered to the martyrs. If we yield ourselves to Christ, we too shall find that weakness is turned to strength and fear to courage. And when the last trial comes, whether great or small, we shall discover that the fire cannot consume us, but only reveal the gold that God Himself has placed within. If we ponder more deeply, we begin to see that the courage of martyrs is not only about their personal salvation, but about the witness they leave behind. Their deaths were sermons more powerful than their words, written not with ink, but with blood. And such sermons do not fade with the passing of centuries. They echo still, calling us to awaken from complacency, to remember that Christianity is not a garment to be worn lightly, but a life to be surrendered wholly. The martyr's courage is therefore not theirs alone, it becomes the inheritance of the Church. Just as a family treasures the sacrifices of its ancestors, so we treasure theirs. Their faithfulness strengthens our faltering steps. Their joy in the face of death steadies our trembling hands, and their vision of eternity clears our clouded eyes. They teach us that discipleship is not a matter of convenience, but of covenant, not a seasonal preference, but a lifelong allegiance. Now let us ask, what lies at the very heart of such courage? It is, I believe, trust. Trust that God is good, even when the world rages. Trust that Christ is worth more than every earthly treasure. Trust that resurrection is not a fanciful dream, but the bedrock of reality. Without such trust, no soul could endure the flame, but with it, even the weakest heart becomes unshakable. This trust is not built in an instant. It is cultivated, as gold is refined, through small fidelities. The martyr who stands before the sword was once the disciple who prayed quietly in secret, who obeyed God in little matters, who surrendered in daily life. Thus, the courage to die well is born from the courage to live well. And if we, in our small obediences, yield ourselves each day to God, we too are being prepared for whatever trial He allows. Think of it this way: the fire which reveals gold is never wasted. Even the sparks that fall upon us in ordinary struggles are part of the refining. When we bear insult with patience, when we forgive the wound of a friend, when we choose honesty though it costs us dearly, we are being shaped into vessels fit for glory. And though the world does not call this courage, heaven does. The courage of martyrs, then, is not an alien reality, but the flowering of the same seed planted in every Christian soul. It is the full bloom of faith, the completion of trust, the triumph of love. And this means that their story is not merely theirs, it is ours. For the same Spirit who carried them through fire is the Spirit given to us. And so, when next we tremble before some trial, be it small or great, let us remember that fire does not destroy the gold, it only unmasks it. Let us recall that the martyrs did not conquer by their strength, but by leaning wholly upon the one who conquered death itself. And if we, too, lean upon Him, we shall find in our hour of testing that His courage becomes ours, and His victory our crown. There is yet another mystery in the courage of martyrs, one that speaks not only of faith and hope, but of love's strange power to transfigure suffering. For when a man or woman lays down life itself for Christ, it is not simply an act of endurance. It is a declaration of affection. Love, after all, is the only force that can make sacrifice sweet. The martyr's song in the flames is not the grim chant of resignation, but the hymn of one who has found a beloved worth everything. Their courage is the language of love spoken in the dialect of fire. Here we perceive the deepest paradox of all. The world believes the martyr loses, yet in truth, the martyr gains. Stripped of earthly possessions, mocked, cast out, destroyed, they seem defeated, and yet heaven crowns them victors. The tyrant, though draped in splendor, is the one left in ruin. The martyr, though clothed in ashes, shines like the sun. For love is stronger than death, and those who cling to Christ cannot be conquered by any earthly power. This truth should not make us morbid, as if we are to seek suffering for its own sake. God is no lover of pain. He is the lover of souls. The fire he allows is not to crush us, but to cleanse us, not to consume, but to reveal. The courage of martyrs teaches us that even in the fiercest storm, God remains faithful. Even in the darkest night, his dawn approaches. And the dawn to which they bore witness is not one we must wait to behold. It is the very light by which we live, even now. So when we consider their example, let us not only admire but imitate. Perhaps our call will not be to the scaffold or the pyre. More likely, it will be the steady, hidden courage of daily faithfulness, speaking truth in a world of falsehood, forgiving when bitterness beckons, standing with the weak when it costs us dearly. These, too, are martyrdoms in miniature fires in which the gold of our souls may shine. And one day, when the final fire comes, not of persecution, but of the refining that precedes eternity, we shall find that the God who sustained the martyrs sustains us as well. We shall hear his voice, stronger than the roar of any flame, saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And in that moment, all our fears shall melt into joy, and every sacrifice shall be revealed as treasure laid up in heaven. The courage of martyrs, then, is nothing less than the courage of Christ himself, shared with his people. It is his victory lived again in them, his triumph extended through their weakness. Fire reveals gold, and in their witness, we glimpse the gleaming reality of a kingdom that cannot be shaken. We must now consider how the courage of martyrs not only inspires the church, but convicts the world. For each act of fidelity under fire is a challenge to the idols of the age. When a man chooses Christ over comfort, he exposes the emptiness of power, wealth, and even survival itself as ultimate goods. The tyrant promises life if one will bow. The martyr answers, "I already have life, and it is hid with Christ in God." Thus, the courage of martyrs unmasks the illusions upon which empires are built. The might of armies, the terror of execution, the threats of rulers all are revealed as impotent when confronted by a soul anchored in eternity. This is why the blood of martyrs has always been dangerous to tyrants. It is not simply that they resist unto death, but that in dying they prove there is a kingdom beyond the reach of earthly kings. Their deaths become proclamations. You cannot kill what Christ has made alive. You cannot silence what the Spirit has set free. And so, the martyr's witness becomes the seed of revolution, not the revolution of swords and banners, but of hearts transformed, consciences awakened, and generations stirred to faith. Yet let us not confine this vision to distant ages. The world still presses upon us, if not with fire and sword, then with subtler temptations. We are urged to worship at the shrines of success, reputation, and ease. We are told that truth must bow to convenience, that faith must keep silent lest it offend, that loyalty to Christ must bend when culture demands. In such moments, the spirit of martyrdom is as necessary as ever. For though our trials may seem smaller, the courage required is the same. To stand with Christ when it costs us dearly is to share in some measure the honor of those who stood before flames. And here is the heartening truth. The same grace that upheld them is offered to us. God does not abandon his people in the hour of trial. He did not leave Stephen as the stones fell. He showed him the heavens opened. He did not forsake Polycarp in the fire. He gave him words of praise upon his lips. And he will not forsake you when your faith is tested, whether by ridicule or by loss, by rejection or by sacrifice. The courage of martyrs is not the product of natural strength, but of supernatural presence. Christ in them was their victory, and Christ in you will be yours. Therefore, let us take courage from their courage. Let us remember that our trials, though real, are also opportunities for gold to be revealed. Let us live in such a way that when history looks back not at emperors nor at empires, but at souls, the light of Christ may be seen shining even in us. For at the last, what will endure? Not the roar of tyrants, not the applause of crowds, not the fleeting comforts of this world. What will endure is the gold that fire could not consume, faith, hope, and love crowned by the glory of God. And so, dear friends, as I draw these reflections to a close, let me return once more to the image with which we began. Fire revealing gold. The courage of martyrs is not an ornament of the church past, nor a mere tale for the curious historian. It is a living parable, a mirror in which every generation must see itself. For though the flames of persecution may not burn in our streets, the fires of testing will surely come to each of us. They come in the decisions of conscience, in the sacrifices asked of love, in the moments when faith collides with the world's demands. The martyrs have shown us what faith looks like when refined to its purest essence. They remind us that the Christian path is not an escape from suffering, but a transfiguration of it. In their witness we see that courage is not born of arrogance, nor of stoic indifference, but of trust in the goodness of God and the certainty of His promises. Theirs is the courage of sheep who follow a shepherd stronger than wolves, the courage of children who rest in a father's care even as the night grows dark. If we are honest, we may confess that we do not yet feel such strength in ourselves. We tremble at smaller trials, we falter at lesser costs. Yet this, too, the martyrs teach us, that courage is not self-generated. It is given. The Spirit who sustained them in their hour is the same Spirit who dwells in us. God does not ask us to manufacture bravery from the frailty of our flesh. He asks us only to surrender, to trust, and to lean wholly upon Him. In that surrender, fear loses its dominion, and love begins to reign. The legacy of the martyrs is therefore twofold. It rebukes our timidity, and it strengthens our resolve. It warns us against building our lives on comfort and ease, yet it also comforts us with the assurance that even the weakest believer can be made strong when grace is given. Their courage, like a torch passed down the centuries, is handed now to us. What we do with it, whether we hide it or let it burn, will shape not only our own lives, but the witness we leave for those who follow. Therefore, let us not be afraid of the fires that come. Let us remember that God's refining does not destroy, but reveals, that the loss we dread may become the gain we most desire, and that in all things Christ is our companion. The courage of martyrs is not an unreachable summit, but the fruit of abiding in the vine, the overflow of hearts set on eternity. And if we keep our eyes fixed on that eternal country, we too shall find strength to walk faithfully through every trial. May their song become our song, their steadfastness our hope, their vision our inheritance. And when the final fire has passed, may it be said of us also, the gold was revealed, and it shone with the glory of God. My friends, if these reflections have stirred your heart, I invite you to continue this journey with us by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. In so doing, you help spread not merely words, but the light of truth that points us all toward the eternal.